Hey, we are the Brothers Mahoney. I am Michael.
And I am James.
And today we are talking about Spearhead from Space, which is the first appearance of Jon Pertwee as a third Doctor, also the first story of Doctor Who to be in color, and it aired back in January 1970 and written by Robert Holmes.
Yeah, this story is important for a lot of reasons. One, of course, as Michael just said, the very first Doctor Who that aired in color, which for some people means it's the first Doctor Who they'll actually watch, because I know there's some people who just don't like black and white and they're missing out. But there's other people who black and white actually gives them headaches, so they can't be blamed for not watching older Doctor Who. Furthermore, it's of course the first appearance of Jon Pertwee as the third Doctor, and it begins the 3-season-long arc of the Doctor's attack on Earth, helping unit in either the 70s or 80s, as the fan-famous unit dating controversy goes.
And to give the plot straight from the back of the DVD box, and this is the special edition DVD. There's also a copy that came out back in 2001?
2001, maybe 2003, in the early days anyway.
Yeah, we mentioned in our introduction video that we had that DVD didn't even have subtitles. That's how old that DVD release was. But this one, nice, crisp, and subtitles is all I can ask for. Exile. The Time Lords have banished the newly regenerated Doctor to Earth. But the Doctor isn't the only alien to have arrived, as a swarm of meteorites have crashed into the sleepy English countryside, bringing with them a terrible new threat to mankind. As the Nastine plan takes shape, Unit, the Doctor, and his newly appointed scientific advisor, Liz Shaw, race against time to stop humanity being replaced by a terrifying plastic facsimile race.
I must say that plot makes it sound cooler than it actually was, but this is still a pretty good story.
Yeah, I think it's really fun. Naturally, Jon Pertwee is a much more action-oriented Doctor than what we generally get from Patrick Troughton or William Hartnell, and you can definitely feel it in this story.
Yeah, in this story, of course, it's a regeneration story, so for the first episode and a half, Jon Pertwee is basically out of it, and it's up to the other cast to hold the story up. And of course, we get the reintroduction of Nicholas Courtney playing the Brigadier, who we get to enjoy for basically the rest of the Jon Pertwee era. He had very strong appearances in the Web of Fear and in the Invasion, and now we get to see Unit up close and personal for a long time now. We also get the introduction to the rather snarky Liz Shaw, played by Caroline John. She was a companion I was as familiar with because she only appeared in 4 stories, but she really does make a pretty good presence in this episode because she's very questioning and dismissive of the Brigadier, and it's just a very interesting personality she has because she's very smart, but she's also just rather snarky.
Yeah, she's really competent. She's brought in by Unit to be a scientific advisor. Of course, this is right before the Doctor comes back, so in a way she's almost shunted to the side. But she becomes the Doctor's assistant as she gets along quite well with the Doctor, which is good because she doesn't get along well out with the Brigadier.
Yes, and it's also a good thing she gets along well with this Doctor, because this Doctor can be a bit, well, we discussed it during the 3 Doctors, it can be a bit on the elitist side. So it probably helps a lot that she has a lot of experience in the scientific fields, because she had multiple degrees, if I'm not very much mistaken.
Yeah, she knew quite a bit of things, and naturally the Doctor, who is the Doctor of practically everything, they would have a lot to get along with.
This episode also had the first appearance of a personal favorite of mine, the Autons, who we just discussed in the Rose episode. Because although they were not named in Rose, the Autons were the first, I don't know why, but the Autons were the first classic Who villain they decided to bring back in the revival.
The Autons appear in other places too, such as the opening to the next season, Terror of the Autons, which is also the first appearance of the Master. Along with that, they appeared in some interesting places in Who lore. In the Past Doctor Adventures, which was a BBC book line, there was a Synth Sapiens T-Arm, which was, I believe, a 6th Doctor book with him dealing with the Autons.
And I'm sure he loved them.
Colin Baker loved a great many things, mostly his voice. Autonomy was a new series adventure book, which I believe you said it had the 10th Doctor?
Yeah, it's the 10th Doctor. enjoying the process of the Autons. And I have to say, Autonomy is a great name for an Auton book.
Yeah, and also this one's a bit more random. If you guys are into those big Finish releases, this is the Torchwood monthly audio releases, and the Autons appeared in the release Sargasso. I'm not that familiar with Torchwood. I have seen the first season, but I think it'd be interesting watching Torchwood deal with the Autons because I do think they make a decently effective antagonist when they do pop up.
Yeah, as long as they're done right. And actually, if I'm not very much mistaken, I believe either this month or next month, the Autons will be popping up in a two-part Torchwood story. I believe it's called, I think, Davos. I believe I saw it promoted on Big Finish. Might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure I saw that. And that looks quite exciting. No, we're not going to hear that for a long time, but nonetheless, it looks exciting.
Yeah, so the Autons here, though, in the first appearance, I think are decently effective. The story is sort of interesting. There's a plastics factory sort of in the middle of nowhere and sort of been taken over by the Nastine consciousness and the Autons. And they sort of get into a conflict with UNIT. And when the Doctor is finally able to find himself, like James said, he's sort of out of it for the first episode and a half. And this is unlike many Jon Pertwee stories, this is a more digestible story. It's only 4 episodes long. So he's out of it for the first third of the story. But when he comes in too, he also causes a bit of a problem for the Autons.
Yeah, the Autons were most certainly not expecting to need to deal with the Doctor. And they got pretty far in their invasion plan. I mean, of course, they were made in a plastics factory. So unlike in Rose, it actually makes sense that these Autons have a gun in their hand. And they were quite effective with it. They sat down police officers and just random civilians in the street. We see at least, 6, 7, 8 people get killed during the beginnings of the plan in episode 4.
Yeah, the Auton uprising is a pretty cool sequence of scenes. I enjoyed.
Yeah, apparently they were attacking, I believe it mentioned barracks. They were attacking communication centers all over the UK, which is just... I mean, that's a very open, very brazen attempt. And also they're trying to get Auton impersonators in place of civil servants, of politicians, of those in the media. Honestly, like as far as invasions go in Doctor Who, I would put them up as being pretty close to having that succeed. It was only stopped by the Doctor in very nick of time.
And it was almost not stopped because they tried to abduct the Doctor out of the hospital. So he crash lands. Of course, he just was forcefully regenerated, by scarecrows, but we'll get into that later. The Nightwalkers. So he crash lands in the TARDIS. He's unconscious. He's found. Of course, the Brigadier, once he hears that there's a man found next to a blue police box, he immediately thinks, oh, it's the Doctor. And that itself, I think, goes to show even though they've only had a couple of encounters, I think it really goes to show the relationship between the two, a deep sense of respect. He himself goes to confirm that, hey, this is the Doctor. Now, of course, the Doctor has regenerated and he doesn't recognize the Doctor, but the Doctor does recognize him.
Yeah, and as for the Doctor's regeneration, he takes it better than most other Doctors. And like, the 5th Doctor's out for a while after his regeneration. David Tennant is out for almost an entire episode. But he basically just is relaxing in a hospital bed of a very quaint-looking cottage hospital. It looked so unlike what you would expect to see of a hospital. I loved every scene that took place in this hospital because it looked amazing.
Yeah, so I'm a big movie fan. I watch a lot of older movies, and it always amazes me to see what hospitals look like back in the 20s and 30s and 40s. I mean, it's pretty much just a mattress and some saline, and that's pretty much it. Like, this hospital looked more like a country lodge than it did a hospital. Like, it was, the walls were like paneled wood.
Yeah, that had a carpeted floor.
The hallways, there's no way you could fit a gurney down one of those hallways. Unless it's very thin gurney, but there's just not much room in those hallways.
No, it has a very shagging layout.
In fact, if you treat vacuum workers wrong too, you also get the media coming into that's always fun times.
I do hope he had more of a reason than that to bring the media in.
Actually, fun fact, and you might have seen this, that character actually appears again in the Doctor Who novel Who Killed Kennedy.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that. I did not see that. But anyway, but the Doctor actually takes his regeneration quite well. He looks at himself in the mirror, and of course he's pretty dismayed, saying, oh no, this won't do at all. But eventually, once he's back on his feet again, he starts becoming more attuned to what his face is, and he enjoys the expressive nature. In fact, he tries to communicate with Lisa using his eyebrows in some random language that of course he knows.
Yeah, and it's a good thing too that he was able to get back to his feet, because as we saw, the Autons sort of find out, hey, there's some guy with an alien life form in this hospital, and they attempt to abduct him.
And they got really close too.
Yeah, no, it was, but it's a somewhat, because I alluded to earlier that Jon Pertwee's time as the Doctor was a bit more action oriented. You got some chase sequences, sometimes chase sequences that lasted 5 episodes. It's never quite that bad, but Jon Pertwee's stories are a lot different from a lot of other Doctor stories. And in this, he's being pushed out in the wheelchair. He's, half unconscious, being pushed out in the wheelchair, about to be abducted. Then he gets some awareness of what's going on, and he's able to force his abductors off of him, and he tries rolling down the street in a wheelchair.
And there's a scene that lasts a good 30 seconds of him just rolling away from his captors in a wheelchair, while the unit soldiers who are around the hospital protecting the Doctor are shooting at this van that just tried to kidnap him in broad daylight. It's very action-packed, it's very spy.
And that actually leads to another thing I really liked about this story, and it sort of ties in with the cliffhanger of episode 1. Everything in the story seems so close together. The Doctor's tower just landed in the wards, in the patch of wards. So is it that much? It's not that far away from the hospital, because the Doctor's able to get pretty close to his TARDIS. So the wards is pretty close to the hospital. The factory where the Autons come from seems like it's pretty close to the wards, which means it's also close to the hospital. Everything seems very localized. It's a feeling of closeness that I really appreciate.
Yeah, this story is actually interesting because it does something with the jump cuts that I don't think I've noticed in a lot of other Doctor Who episodes, where a character will say something and then it jump cuts, and that thing they just said they'll either do or have already done. It's very distinctive because it keeps it very fast-paced, this episode, and it works really well. I'm not complaining about it, but it's something I very much noticed in this episode.
Yeah, we mentioned before that sometimes it's our personal opinion that some Jon Pertwee stories are a bit lengthy, maybe a bit longer than they need to be. But this one, I think, keeps things moving at a pretty good pace, and it seems pretty crisp, in my opinion.
Plus, we get some fun side characters. There's a Potse we meet in the very first episode who actually steers something vital to the plan of the Nastian Consciousness, who, of course, runs the Autons. So he's in a cordoned part of the forest, and he needs to get out and, evade the unit soldiers. But what he does is he just walks up to a unit soldier, and after you sell him, what was it? Fresh cut rabbit?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just telling him fresh cut rabbit. And the guy's like, oh, I don't need it. You're Potse, get out of here, granddad. Because, of course, unit doesn't care about Potse. They have a lot of more important things to deal with. So he's able to walk basically right under the nose of a unit soldier with an alien artifact because they don't sort what's actually in his bag.
Yeah, that guy was played by, I believe, a Neil Wilson, and he appears throughout all 4 episodes, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, he luckily survives.
Yeah, so he's a fun character, and he pops up later, which leads to a really fun scene. But yeah, there's a lot of fun characters here. He's a good character. Of course, Liz Shaw is a lot of fun, especially when she interacts with the Doctor and the Brigadier. Brigadier's always good quality.
Nicholas Courtney was a great actor. He really elevated. I don't think the unit or Axai would have worked without Nicholas Courtney. I really don't.
Yeah, what is interesting is, though he appeared in The Invasion, this does not have John Bunton in it.
No, it doesn't. I'm assuming, I don't know where the actor was. I'm sure he pops up this season. I would assume so, but I can't recall off the top of my head.
And one thing I also noticed about watching this again, it has been a little while since we've seen this, is that, and actually, a side note, this is the first time we've watched it from this special edition, so that was nice. But some of the scenes in this are quite a bit more violent than I usually associate with Doctor Who. There's even a car crash and a guy smashed into a windshield, and we actually see blood. Now it's very brightly colored blood, but I don't often see blood. At least I don't think I often see blood on Doctor Who. And that scene was almost shocking to my modern sensibilities.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's certainly striking because it didn't come out of nowhere, but the guy's driving back to unit base with something that he needs to give to the Brigadier, and Autons taps out of nowhere. The guy crashes his vehicle, and the scene basically ends, and it's one of those jump cuts. We cut to the Brigadier saying that a soldier, has died, and an artifact was stolen. And I just think it's a very effective way to do that.
The Autons themselves were used to pretty good effect. They're sort of sent out for scouting to pick up these artifacts that are necessary. There's a scene where the poacher who brought the artifact back to his house has sort of gone back to unit to say, oh, hey, if I know where an artifact is, might there be some coin in it for the poor poacher? So he left the artifact back in his, what do they call it, like a cabin?
Yeah, back in his shard.
Yeah, in a shard in his little home in the middle of nowhere. So the Auton is sort of sent out to retrieve it, and it's just a sort of a creepy scene of the Auton sort of rummaging through a house and the wife going into the house. Who are you? And it's a plastic dummy. It has no face. It's just a faceless creature rummaging through a house. So the Autons, I think, are used in pretty good effect here in that scene when it's just ravaging through the wards, and also, of course, in the last episode when they start doing an all-out attack on the city.
Yeah, they're also used to great effect at the end of episode 2, where we see somebody who had previously worked at the plastics factory, who was let go. He hadn't worked there in a while, and he missed all the changes that happened once the Autons were able to implant themselves in there. And so he's breaking in to try to figure out what's going on. And so he's in the room that he's not supposed to be in, and we just slowly see an Auton. We see all these, dummies behind him. He just thinks they're mannequins. But we slowly see an Auton start to move towards him. And, he's slowly turning his head because he realizes something's wrong. And it's just a great way to end an episode.
And actually, one fun thing I read is that specific actor, it's a guy named Derek Smee. There's a scene where he's sort of climbing over some barbed wire to get into the factory. He apparently actually gashes his finger or hand on the barbed wire.
Oh.
Yeah, so before he went to the hospital, he wanted some band-aids and plaster to put over the wound so he could actually finish his scene. After that, then he was sort of rushed to the hospital. So that was commitment. And the actor didn't have that much in the story, though. He had a really cool final scene. He gets attacked by an Auton in a tent, and that scene, I think, is another really good scene. But I just have a deep appreciation. They didn't have that much to do for the main story. I thought he was a pretty good actor and obviously showed some good commitment.
Yeah, this wasn't quite Hinchcliffe level horror, but there was a lot of scenes in this that were getting close to that type of horror, because the Autons, when done right, can be very frightful creatures, and they mostly did them right in this episode.
Another interesting thing of note is that there's a scene as the Doctor is trying to escape the hospital where he's about to get caught. He's in a locker room, and he sees a door that says doctors only, and he's like, oh, well, it's me, bruh.
That made me laugh because I'm not sure it was intentional, but the way that the Doctor sees the door says doctors only, and he stops for a second and he just walks through. He is a doctor, so I guess that technically counts him.
Yeah, so he's just in the locker room. He's about to get caught by two doctors. So he just jumps into this really strange sort of shower type thing.
Yeah, I've never seen one quite like it.
And actually, another fun fact, apparently they put this scene in specifically because they thought it looked so unique that they wanted to use it in some form.
Oh, well, that would explain it.
So Jon Pertwee's Doctor is taking a shower. We just see his upper body, his torso, and we see that he has a tattoo on one of his arms, and sort of like what they go into to try to explain that in universe.
Yeah, it's often been commented on. I'm sure that eventually an extended media just said it outright, but it's often believed that it was about giving to him because he was in exile, and because, of course, they're Time Lords. Once they remove the exile at the end of the Three Doctors, which we have previously discussed, they can just remove the tattoo basically as it pleases them. So it's not like they had to wait for another regeneration. I'm not sure if we ever see the tattoo past this point. I would presume they probably tried to keep it careful because someone in production eventually realized, why does the Doctor have a tattoo? But the idea that it's used for somebody who is exiled, I've always thought that was a nice, cute, in-universe idea.
Yeah, and Jon Pertwee served with the Royal Navy for 6 years, which is where he got the tattoo. And I just think it's sort of amusing that one they threw in the scene just so they could use it shower.
And of course, it caused a whole another issue for them.
Yeah, so it's just one of those fun background stories that always amused me.
Yeah, this story is just a lot of fun. And speaking of being exiled, I guess it's a good time to fit in the segment where we just place these stories according to the TARDIS wiki and their personal Doctor timelines. This one is, of course, a lot easier than most because it's a regeneration story, so nothing can really come before it, at least for the Doctor. As Michael alluded to earlier, there was a...
Well, I guess let's set this up properly. So in the show, at the end of Patrick Troughton's run in the War Games, we see that the Doctor has been caught by the Time Lords and he is forced to regenerate. And you can watch it and say, hey, it leads straight into Spearhead from Space. But fans have long suspected that there was more to it because of the whole Season 6B theory, which is now pretty much Season 6B fact.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember, of course, we weren't part of the fandom in the 60s and 70s, but I believe Wiley came into prominence due to the two Doctors, where we see the second Doctor and Jamie at a point in a timeline when they should never exist, doing missions for the Time Lords, which does fit in with anything we saw during the second Doctor's era. So the theory and confirmed fact goes that instead of forcing the regeneration automatically, the Time Lords use the Doctor. I believe it mentions in the two Doctors that he is a pariah of Time Lord society, so the Time Lords can always deny sending him on missions. And send him on missions they do. There are novels with the second Doctor going on missions. There are audio stories where he's working for the Time Lords. There are comic stories where he's working for the Time Lords. They really use this Doctor, and then they still force him to regenerate. One of the most interesting things in Doctor Who history is the fact that, along with the series at the time, they were also being published weekly stories featuring the Doctor in TV comics.
Yeah, and these comic strips sometimes were a bit iffy with what we see from the show. The Doctor has some additional grandchildren, for instance, and that's always fun. But the relevant part here is that apparently once the second Doctor was done being sent on missions for the Time Lords, he was brought back down to Earth.
And for his exile.
Yeah, for his exile, and they were going to force him to regenerate. But before they could do that, he was able to escape the Time Lords on Earth. And this, I forget how many stories, it's like 5 or 6, maybe 7 stories of him on Earth before he gets forcefully regenerated. And he's pretty much just on like a TV talk show talking about supernatural events. And it has to be one of the more striking final scenes of a Doctor. The Doctor is sort of lured out to a farmer's field where the scarecrows start walking at night. And the Doctor's like, hey, sounds curious. So he goes to investigate. And this just shows the ingenuity of the Time Lords, because they, the Time Lords, have sort of possessed these scarecrows to attract the Doctor. And then it's in that they finally force him to regenerate, which is in a comic strip called The Nightwalkers.
Yeah, it came out in TV comic issues 934 through 936. Now, these, again, were weekly comics in the UK. I'm never going to get my hand on any of them. I wouldn't want to imagine the astronomical price.
But luckily, you can find a lot of them online if you know where to look.
That is true. But yeah, these were only 2-page stories. So, I mean, they were just story after story with the most dubious continuity with the show. I mean, these things barely fit in with Doctor Who canon, as anybody would understand it. But the policy of the TARDIS Wiki is basically to fit anything in, if possible, which is reasonably enough because Doctor Who canon has always been a mess. So, why not? I mean, who gets to discriminate against what's canon when there's been almost 60 years of media? And I mean, all of it has a place somewhere. So they are very interesting pieces of history to look into if you're unaware of them. And in fact, I mean, these are very important going forward for the Doctor. I believe these weekly things existed at least up to Tom Baker. they probably existed even past that point, but I'm not as familiar with any Fifth Doctor weekly stories. And I know that TV Comic changed the names and eventually stopped publication. But so the very next story, of course, would usually be Doctor Who and the Solarians. That's the next TV story. But because the Doctor is stuck on Earth and the situation he's in, it's just rife for there to be a lot of other stories in between these stories. I mean, this first season of his is only 4 stories long. I mean, we've seen past seasons. For example, the first season of Doctor Who was 9 stories. Now, one of those was a only 2-episode story. But I mean, this was a huge reduction in episodes. Overall, again, this only had 4 stories compared to 9. And an episode count, I believe the first season had 44 episodes, and this one was down to like 21 or so. Well, I think 25 actually. But nonetheless, that's a huge reduction. But so the Doctor, of course, enjoyed his time with the Autons, and the very next thing on his timeline would be a continuation of the TV comic stories, the Awkward Experiments, just another short. I believe these were actually in color at this point, much like the show, but just another short comic story. And we also catch up with him in an audio big finish with Go Audio. I'm not sure exactly how they work together. I believe there was some BBC connection as well, with the story Vengeance of the Stones, which is a nice name, and it came out in 2013 with, of course, somebody else portraying the Third Doctor, since at this point Jon Pertwee had passed. It fits in right before Doctor Who and the Solarians, which, for the record, I actually really like Doctor Who and the Solarians, but we'll get there soon enough.
Yeah, so it's always fascinating to hear about exactly the extent to Doctor Who media, what with comic strips, comic books, audio, dramas, books. There's so much out there, and I just think it's fascinating listening to where things fit in a proposed timeline.
Yeah, it's just it's one of those pet things of mine that I just find fascinating. I find the idea of chronicalizing and being able to take the time fascinating. And anybody who's put work into the timeline on this wiki, I applaud you, because I don't know how the hell you do it when it comes to Doctor Who.
Yeah, as for Spearhead from Space as a whole, I think it's a pretty solid story. I don't think it's an amazing outing. I don't have quite the nostalgic feelings I have toward this one as I do something like the Three Doctors, for instance. But then again, there's no reason that I could. But it is a very solid story. I think it's pretty fun. It's very digestible. Somewhat ironically, I'm not sure that Spearhead from Space is a best title, since it's really only relevant for a single scene and it's never actually called a Spearhead. But that aside, it is a striking title. But I think it's a pretty good story. I think Liz Shaw shows a lot of promise as a new companion. And the Doctor being in exile on Earth, well, it might be limiting. Like, you're not going to see any wild alien planets or the tower just materializing in the middle of a swamp or a pyramid from Mars. But I think it's pretty fun. And it's a very interesting period of the Doctor's history.
Yeah, it sets up a nice 3-season arc. You know, most of Doctor Who in the past, the classic says, weren't known for the story arcs, but this was a real story arc, and it was a gold part of the Third Doctor's era. And even after the exile was lifted, he still spent a lot of time with the unit, because he had grown accustomed to them at that point, and they really do need him.
Yeah, and of course, Jon Pertwee worked with Unit a lot, and to be fair, so Tom Baker tried. Very first Tom Baker's story was Robot, and that was another story based on Earth, where Tom Baker's Doctor worked with the Unit. But I've never seen anything as awkward as the Tom Baker Doctor trying to work with the Brigadier. It just does not have the same flow that Jon Pertwee and the Brigadier have.
It most certainly did not. Robot is not the best Tom Baker story, but it is hilarious to see the absolute difference between Jon Pertwee's Doctor, who is able to get on John, who's speaking quite well with the Brigadier, and Tom Baker's Doctor, who can't take anything seriously, because it's not his groove. He's not the guy who's going to stand in a lab doing slow studies into a part of alien material trying to figure out what it is. that does not fit at all with Tambego's personality or the personality of the Doctor. But yeah, no, I really do like this story. I think it's a great introduction to the Third Doctor. I think it's a great introduction to what we'll kind of expect to see in the rest of his era. And I think it really just works. We get some great Brigadier stuff. We get Lisa, who is, I personally think she is one of the more forgettable companions, but she works pretty well with the Third Doctor for this season, and which is good because we don't see her in any other season. And she's one of those companions who just kind of gets the boot. We don't see her leave. She's just gone when the next season starts up, which that's a pity, but I believe there are some audios that do some more justice to Lisa, which is a good thing. But yeah, overall, it's a pretty good story. I don't really have any major complaints with it at all. It might not have the best name, as Michael said, but I would say it's a damn good start to his season.
Yeah, and if you don't have much experience with Classic Who, this might be another okay story to look at. It is in color, so it might be more accessible to someone trying to get into Classic Who if black and white is a barrier that you might have. And again, pretty action-packed, pretty brisk, only 4 episodes long. Yeah, I think it's a pretty solid story. I give it an Auton out of Auton.
Well, it most certainly deserves Auton out of Auton. That sounds like it's a rating that will not be picked up, but I'm happy you try. So, what are you next going to be discussing, Michael?
Yeah. Next up, we have an audio, The Land of the Dead from Big Finish with the 5th Doctor and Nisa. Hope that you had a fun time. I have been Michael.
And I'm James.
And we are the Brothers Mahoney. I hope you have a nice night /day /mid-afternoon. Later, guys.